All right. So one of the things that me and Ridge were talking about earlier was both of us have integrated um, electronic lotto into our permitting systems. And I don't know if that's something, Wendy, if you guys have looked at potentially doing in your pilot project.
We're implementing it kind of at the same time
Okay.
so that and it's part of the same software, but they're separated. Whereas with our company, the lotto was part of the safe work permit process.
Okay.
And now it's going to your lotto is going to sort of be separated where you will write a permit and then you attach if there's a lotto that's associated with it, which we think is going to help. It's going to be a different mindset than what our team has done in the past because that's not the way they kind of view it. But I think going forward, it won't take long to make that jump.
Do you have any questions on yours or
No, we're still, like I said, we're still looking, but we certainly are going to try to tie as much together as possible. I mean, we believe that, through SAP with all our, because that's what we use as well, that pulling the equipment numbers into the system to be able to identify what is the lockout for that and be able to pull that in and be able to generate those lockout lists for the job that's going to be done and everything, tying that into the work permit. Because a lot of times the job will be locked out for more than one shift, one day, one week, whatever. So it's got to be somehow tied into that, and the safe work permit system has to be tied back into that lockout. So we're going to look at something that kind of brings it all together.
how about you guys?
Yeah, so we have a pretty similar system where the permit and the lotto, they're in the same system, but they're kind of separate where you actually attach the log to it. It's worked very, very well. So I think one of the greatest things about it is once again talking about those templates. So like for those bigger outages or turnarounds or even the day-to-day PMs, you can create that log and whenever you go to it, all you gotta do is pull up the pump number or name it a specific title, and you can go right to it, pull it up, it'll be ready to go to attach to any permit. So that just speeds up the process. No recreation, no printing off documents as far as, is this the most up to date, one we have? Keep it all up in the energy control log, and it just makes it much easier and faster for operations to go throughout it.
Yeah, absolutely. So our system is very similar and it's basically a template, right? So you have a approved templates where it has to go through an approval process before our operators can actually use it. And with that, one of the things that, like when we were going through, one of the things that ended up being a benefit that we didn't even realize, but the company that we're working with brought it to our attention was when you approve a template or, it puts a timestamp on it. So OSHA has a 1 year where you're supposed to come back and you're supposed to reapprove them every year. So once that one is approved, it sets a timestamp. If it's a year away and someone goes to use it again, it has to be reapproved before it can be used again. So it meets that OSHA requirement of that 1 year approval process. Yours probably does the same thing, and it's helpful because before we had a drive folder, right, with all of our approved lockout tagout templates, and it was hard to manage. Very time consuming, like anything else with paper. But one of the things with that process, it simplifies it, and because it's electronic, you're able to run historian data on it. You're able to do all that kind of stuff with it. But ours is based off of a hierarchy, basically. And so if you look at it as being the lockout tagout is at the top. And I'm just going to use, for example, like what we like during a turnaround, you're going into a column. So it's going to have a confined space, it's got blinds, and it's got a permit to work, right? So you'd have your lockout tagout, then you'd have your blind package, then you'd have your confined space, and then you'd have your permit to work. And they're all tied together. And they all have to, for that permit to work to be active, all the other ones have to be active and completed and in the right state. So if you have to modify, like say that lotto permit, you'd have to suspend all the other ones to go in and modify them before you can actually modify it. And then you can put it back in service, and then each one of those you'd have to put back in service. So it all looks at the one above it to make sure that, hey, that confined space, you can't close out a confined space permit if there's still an active permit to work involved. So again, it goes back to the whole thing with it being electronic. It's looking at things, and when people try to select something that it's not ready for, it gives them that instant feedback. You can't do this right now. There's still an open permit, or you can't modify that lockout tagout. There's, a blind package that's in active state, that's active, and that the relationship's there. So I mean, are those some of the things that you guys have looked at into, and is that similar to what you're seeing?
Again, we're piloting. So it's similar, yes. And we're finding, or at least they found in Europe, that they got buy-in and that all those things tied together. For instance, like you said, confined space, and just our lockout tagout with our safe work permit. In the past, our safe work permit drove everything, and all the items were attached to it, but then they had to know. So it wasn't really, and while you were talking, it's a training tool itself, if it's used right. So that it forces them, though it may be painful for a while until they get used to it. But yet we're going down the same road. It's just we're at the beginning.
Okay. How about you, Paul?
Well, we're still investigating a lot of different, and we've had vendors bring in their software and show us different examples, and there is a variety of different companies out there doing it little different ways, and so we're trying to figure out which are the best pieces that we like the most, and everything from the geographical locations of knowing how many permits are in a certain area, and are there any conflicting permits that may be being written that you need to be rethinking. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities out there. It's just we're still, like I say, trying to figure out what all we want to incorporate in our electronic system and go with it from there.
Oh yeah. What about you?
So just want to talked a little bit earlier about being very specific on the valves and stuff like that. So in ours, we're not as specific as in you know, um, specific valve numbers for every single one. We're kind of more the inlet, outlet, location identifiers, and not as per a number per se. Um, so that makes it a little bit easier. So we don't have to put in every single valve and all those things that may make the information in the beginning, very hard to get, right? So we have it up to kind of the operators with approval, right? And they'll label those valves how they want. So as in size, location, inlet, outlet, discharge, 6 inch, and then the magnitude as far as pressure or chemical, right? So that's how we kind of identify those without being very specific to a specific number or valve, which makes it a lot easier, kind of in that process.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know. I'm real big on color coordinating, right? I'm real like I like to see when I look at a system, and you can easily just look and you can say that one's different. Why is that orange and the rest of them are green, right? And so that's what the system we use. Each isolation point has its own tag that's created with a QR code. And so with the tablet, they have to go through, and when they're locking it out, they have to scan that QR code, and on the tablet, it's got your list of all the isolation points. And when you scan it as being locked out and isolated, it goes from orange to green. Once all of them turn green, it can move to the next state, which is to walk down and verify with the contractor. And then they have to do the same thing with all the isolation points. Again, that's one of those. If you have all these isolation points and you haven't got one, it will not let you move to the next step. And that's again, that's some of those things that, at first, we had some people that were struggling. They were, oh my gosh, this is going to be a nightmare, this and that. And then they quickly realized it was so much easier than keeping up with those paper copies of everything. And, they're able to just look on their tablet. They could pass on if it was They were in the middle of isolating a piece of equipment. The next operator who came in and took over, it was so much easier. Okay, this is where they left off. These are the isolation points I still have to do, instead of having to decipher what the other operator scribbled in the logbook, right? So it just it's something that I think it's got a lot of possibilities, and it's got a lot of checks and balances. And I just think that having the two together, having your um, the lotto and your permitting in the same, it's the same system. But you obviously, if you don't have a lotto associated then with a permit, then you don't have to do it. But in the HIRA, for the lotto and the job scope, if it says that that lockout tag is required, it will not let that permit move forward until it sees that lotto, a verified and active lotto associated with it. How are you guys handling that? Is that similar?
It's a pretty similar process. So once you kind of attach that log, the energy control to like a permit that requires it, it won't let you do it until all the steps are done. So the approval by operations and the walk down by maintenance, it checks for all those items before it's actually issued as an approved permit. So very similar. And then, just a few things that I was thinking about is another really big advantage is able to upload the PIN IDs. And one of the things that the operation groups have been working on is actually getting a visual image of every single lockout, tag, all those are uploaded into the injury control log. So every time you go in there, you know exactly where it is. And like for contractors or for people who don't do it a lot, say safety wants to come look at it, it is a great tool that I can go in the injury control log, pull up those visuals and know exactly where those are in the field.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, visuals. It's a lot easier for people when you have a visual of what it looks like, instead of, oh, just go to XYZ piece of equipment and get the discharge valve, right? Um, so I know we've talked about the implementation. We've talked about some of our challenges with, like, doing the Wi-Fi and things like that, or connectivity. Do you have any other, like, for you guys who are like really just starting out and piloting? Do you have any I don't know, suggestions or questions for us on how we did anything like for the implementation?
I have one question. Um, when it comes to isolations, how well did the software that you guys use help your employees with order of isolation and de-isolation?
It's uh it's very robust because you create a process flow. So you are creating that list, and it creates those numbers. And so um, if you're telling it this is the order you have to go in, again, because it's electronic, you have to follow that. It can force you to follow a certain routine. Or you don't have to enable that, and you can just say, here's the 4 isolation points. They just have to be done, and then test, try, and all that stuff before you move forward. But you can enable the system to, I have 25 isolation points. This is the order they need to be done in. You can enable it to do that.
Yeah, we have kind of like a hybrid approach where if there is 25, you can actually put them in order and sort them, but we don't require that approval to do one first and two. But it allows you to sort in order of like you want to do a walk down or something. So you just sort them in the order you want to do the walk down. Hmm.
So if you're doing a kind of a hybrid paper and an electronic type version, how do you go about with the collection of monitoring results? How do you put that back into the system so you have it?
So that's a really good question, because we're using a hybrid. And so when they go out, and it's someone that's having to print out a piece of paper, when they go out in the field, they're actually completing the permit on the operator's tablet. And so when they get all done and all the verifications and the who's on the permit, so there's actual, like, who's going to be working on this permit. They've added all the people to it. They've signed everything. That operator can actually hit print from that tablet, and it'll print in the permit office right there, and that contractor can go back there and pick it up. They can perform their work, and then when they come back at the end of the shift or when they're done with the job, they scan it and they can close it out, and everything's electronic at that point. If they do where people come on and off their crew, it has the ability where they get with that operator and they would, hey, John Smith left. He had to go work on another job. We brought in Reid to work on this one. And so they can actually do that, update it in the electronic system as well. And then they can update that on the paper permit by just initialing and saying that, adding those people and taking off those people.
And if on that note, so if a contractor goes off with that permit, and if there's a lockout involved, they have to go in and remove their lock off.
Yes.
So does that kind of trigger anything?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. If there's a lockout involved, then that's part of the discussion that they have is we need to get your personal lock off the lock locks. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today and to talk about electronic permitting and integration with lockout tagout. We really appreciate your time and it's a great discussion. And thank you for joining us today.